Hello and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS. A very warm good evening to everyone. I hope all of you are doing absolutely fine. It's Friday, it's 8 p.m. means it is again time for our weekly explained session. As you know, every Friday at 8 p.m. we bring this to you, a live session in which we discuss some of the most important news stories from the UPSC perspective. Now, if you have been reading the newspapers in the past week or so, you would have seen that the one topic that has remained in the news and that has been analyzed from very different points of view is the appointment of the new Chief Justice of India. This gives us an opportunity to look into office of the Chief Justice of India. How is it that the appointment of the Chief Justice of India is carried out? What are the powers, responsibilities and the role that the Chief Justice of India plays? Also, why is it that this specific appointment of Justice D Y Chandrachud is being talked about so much? What is so special with his appointment and other things related to the judiciary at large? We'll be discussing some of the issues related to the Chief Justice of India's office and the judiciary in whole. So without any further delay, let's begin with what we have at our hands. Now, as all of you would be very well aware, India will soon have a new Chief Justice, that is Justice D Y Chandrachud will take over as the Chief Justice of India on the 9th of November. Now, right now, we have Justice U.U. Lalit, who is serving as the Chief Justice of India. He has a very short tenure, not even 75 days. The reason why his tenure is short is that he will retire on November 8 because he will complete 65 years of age. Now, I'm sure all of you are very well aware, in India, we do not have any specific tenure for Supreme Court judges. We do not have any specific fixed tenure for the Chief Justice of India. What we have is just the retirement age. So as you know, 65 years is a retirement age for the Supreme Court judges. So Justice U.U. Lalit will become 65 years old on 8th of November, and that is why he will vacate this particular position. And that is when we will have the next Chief Justice. Because there is no specific tenure and it all depends on the retirement age, the tenure of the Chief Justices varies very, very widely. There are certain people who have been in the Chief Justice's position for not even 1 month because they completed their 65 years of age before 1 month. Then there have been people who have been Chief Justices for multiple years. In fact, a very interesting information here is that the person who actually holds the record for having the longest tenure as a Chief Justice of India was no one else but father of Justice D Y Chandrachud. We will discuss about that also. Apart from that, once Justice D Y Chandrachud takes the oath as the Chief Justice of India, it will be the first time that a father and a son duo have actually held this position of the Chief Justice of India. So once he becomes a Chief Justice officially, there will be a lot of landmarks that will be achieved in India's judicial history, especially with respect to the office of the Chief Justice of India. Now, before we go into this specific appointment of Justice D Y Chandrachud, it's a good time to revise very quickly how is it that the appointment of the Chief Justice of India takes place. Now, I'm sure all of you would have read in Indian polity, it is the President of India who has been empowered under Article 124 to appoint judges in the Supreme Court. So, judges of the Supreme Court, including the Chief Justice of India, are appointed by the President of India. Now, how is it that the Chief Justice of India is appointed in reality? What is the process that is followed? The process is very simple. When the current Chief Justice of India is nearing his age of retirement, he has this responsibility to nominate a successor. Usually, in most of the cases, you would see that the successor that the Chief Justice of India nominates is the senior most judge of the Supreme Court after him. When I say the senior most judge, please do remember the concept of seniority in the Supreme Court is not in terms of age. It is in terms of tenure in the Supreme Court. So the judge after the Chief Justice of India who has spent the most time in the Supreme Court will be considered as the senior most judge after him. They don't consider seniority on the basis of the age. So when the Chief Justice of India is outgoing, when he is nearing his retirement, he will recommend the name of usually the senior most judge in the Supreme Court. Officially, this recommendation is given to the Union Law Minister. Then the Union Law Minister forwards a recommendation to the Prime Minister, who then advises the President of India. Now, let's try and see the history of the appointment of the Chief Justice of India. Can we say that every single time it is the senior most judge of the Supreme Court only who is appointed as the next Chief Justice of India? The answer is no. There have been multiple instances in the past where the senior most judge was not appointed as the Chief Justice of India because of certain political interference. It happened during the emergency years. Indira Gandhi was the Prime Minister first. Justice A.N. Ray became the Chief Justice of India. When Justice A.N. Ray was appointed as the Chief Justice of India, he was not the senior most judge of the Supreme Court. This thing got repeated one more time just a few years later. That is why there was a need that was felt by the judiciary, by the Supreme Court, to settle this question once and for all. That is why in the famous second judge's case of 1993, the Supreme Court said that senior most judge of Supreme Court should alone be appointed to the office of the Chief Justice of India. Since then, it is just a formality that the outgoing Chief Justice will recommend the name of the senior most judge to the Government of India to be the next Chief Justice of India. However, in case the Chief Justice of India has certain doubts in mind about the next incoming judge, then the recommendation might differ. But that is a very extreme scenario. Usually, except the two circumstances that we talked about, we have seen that it is a senior most judge of the Supreme Court that is elevated to the post of the Chief Justice of India. Now, if you look at the appointment of the other judges of the Supreme Court, apart from the Chief Justice of India, you all are aware that they are also appointed by the President of India. But for this purpose, it is a collegium that is formed. The collegium puts forward the recommendation to the President, and the President then appoints that person as a Supreme Court judge. Collegium, as you know, comprises of the Chief Justice of India and 4 senior most judges after him. So it's a 5-member collegium. They are the ones who recommend judges to be appointed in the Supreme Court. As you know, by the virtue of the 3 judges' cases, whatever recommendation is given by this collegium will be binding on the President of India. The collegium looks into those judges or those candidates who are eligible to become a Supreme Court judge. As you know, in order to become a Supreme Court judge in India, you have to fulfill one of the 3 qualifications. First qualification, you should be a High Court judge for 5 years. Second qualification, High Court advocate for 10 years. Or the third qualification, you should be a distinguished jurist in the opinion of the President of India. You all should be aware that so far in the history of India, no person has been appointed as a Supreme Court judge from the third criteria, that is distinguished jurist. So although we do have this concept of distinguished jurist who can be appointed in the Supreme Court as judges, but no distinguished jurist as such has been appointed so far in the Supreme Court. So usually, most of the judges in the Supreme Court are the ones appointed from the first criteria. The first criteria is that they should be High Court judges for 5 years. Very rarely you see the second criteria being used, that is High Court advocate for 10 years, and that is after this the distinguished jurist criteria, which is not really followed here. Now, as I said earlier, the appointment of Justice D Y Chandrachud as a next Chief Justice of India is extremely relevant. Now, this is relevant because of a lot of reasons. One extremely important reason why it is being debated so much is because the Chief Justice of India now, that is Justice D Y Chandrachud, will have a comparatively longer tenure as compared to what usually the Chief Justice of India have. For example, D Y Chandrachud, because he is being appointed at an age where he is not even 63, he will have a tenure of close to 2 years. Meaning that if you look at the last decade or so, the last 10 years, the people who have been appointed as the Chief Justice of India, most of them have not had such long tenures. Most of them have actually had very short tenures. So in this case, this is quite an exception that he will get to become, or he will get to be at the position of the Chief Justice of India for 2 years, which is a pretty long period. Now, if you look at the list of people who have been the Chief Justice of India as per their tenure, as I said earlier, the first name is very interesting. The first name is Justice D Y Chandrachud. He is the father of Justice D Y Chandrachud. He is the one who holds the record for having the longest tenure as the Chief Justice of India in the history of India. His tenure was over 7 years. The reason why he had such a long tenure was because he was actually appointed as a Supreme Court judge in a very young age. The next person in line, Justice Bhuvneshwar Prasad Sinha, over 4 years. Then we had Justice A.N. Ray. I discussed the case of Justice A.N. Ray. When he was appointed as the Chief Justice of India, he was not the senior most judge of the Supreme Court. However, he was still appointed there. Then we have other judges as well in the top 5. On the other hand, as I said earlier, if you look at the people who have held the office of the Chief Justice of India, there are some who have had a very, very short tenure. For example, Justice K.N. Singh, only 17 days, not even 1 month. Justice S. Rajendra Babu, only 29 days, because it all depends on the retirement age. The retirement age being 65, it all depends there. Justice D Y Chandrachud, if everything goes to plan, will have 14th largest or 14th longest tenure as the Chief Justice of India in India's entire history. Now, also, if you look at the judges who have been appointed as the Chief Justice of India in terms of their age, it is no surprise that Justice D Y Chandrachud was the youngest Chief Justice that we have ever had. And because of that, he got to have the longest tenure. Similarly, if you look at Justice U.U. Lalit, the present Chief Justice of India, he was appointed Chief Justice of India when he was not even 3 months away from his 65th birthday. Now, the interesting part is, when we have a person who will be Chief Justice of India for longer tenures, the one very interesting thing that actually happens is, the next people in line, many of them actually retire before they even get a chance to become a Chief Justice of India. For example, Justice D Y Chandrachud, he will be at that post for close to 2 years. In these 2 years, a lot of other judges who are in line after him will retire. So it is not necessary that every judge of the Supreme Court will get a chance to be appointed as the Chief Justice of India as well. There are some justices that will never get to become Chief Justice of India even though they are in the Supreme Court, because they will retire. This is where I want to bring your attention to a very interesting concept. Justice D Y Chandrachud, when he becomes the Chief Justice of India, his collegium will actually be 1+5 and not 1+4. Why is that so? There is a convention that when collegiums are formed, that is 5 judges who decide who shall be the next Supreme Court judge, usually we have a convention that in that collegium, we should have the next Chief Justice of India as well. So whoever is slated or whoever will become the next Chief Justice of India after Justice D Y Chandrachud, that judge should also ideally be in the collegium. But the problem is, because Justice D Y Chandrachud will have a long tenure of 2 years, the other 4 judges apart from him in the collegium will all retire before he retires. Thus, his collegium does not have a next Chief Justice of India. In order to fulfill that requirement, his collegium will have to include one more judge. Which judge? The judge who is supposed to become the next Chief Justice of India after Justice D Y Chandrachud if everything goes to plan. And that is Justice Khanna. Justice Khanna, that is Justice Sanjeev Khanna, as you can see here. Next in line after Justice D Y Chandrachud to become the Chief Justice of India is Justice Sanjeev Khanna, who is expected to take the office in November 2024. If you look at the list of judges in the Supreme Court at present, as per their seniority level, Justice Sanjeev Khanna is at the 10th rank right now. He is the 10th senior most judge in the Supreme Court right now. But because all the judges between him and Justice D Y Chandrachud will retire before the tenure of Justice D Y Chandrachud ends, that is why Justice Khanna will actually get a chance to become the next Chief Justice. That is why even though he is the 10th senior most judge in the Supreme Court, he will be a part of the Collegium. That is why when Justice D Y Chandrachud takes office, his Collegium will be 5+1. This has also happened earlier once. It is not that it has never happened. Also, if you look at this list, justices who are supposed to take up the office of the Chief Justice of India next, there is one extremely interesting name here. That name is the 5th one, Justice B.V. Nagaratna. Why is this name important? This name is important because if everything goes as expected, if everything goes as per expectations, she will become the first female Chief Justice of India. Please do remember, India so far has not had even one female Chief Justice of India. She will be the first ever female Chief Justice of India. If everything goes to plan as expected as per the timeline, she will take over the office in September 2027 for a very short tenure till October 2027. So that would be again a landmark event in the history of India if it actually goes as per the plan. So it remains to be seen how we progress till that particular point. Now the Collegium system, which has been at the center of the limelight, not just because of 1+5, but also because of various reasons, has a lot of issues. As you know, the Collegium system is not mentioned anywhere in the Constitution. It is not mentioned anywhere in the Constitution. It is a prime example of judicial activism, something that the Supreme Court itself invented, something with which the Supreme Court itself gave the powers to decide who shall be the next Supreme Court judge. As you know, the government of India plays no role in deciding who shall be the next Supreme Court or the High Court judge. It is a collegium that plays that role. Now, because of that, there are a lot of people who support the concept of collegium, saying that it ensures that government does not interfere in the working of the Supreme Court. On the other hand, there are a lot of people who criticize the collegium system as well. There are a lot of issues. For example, first one, it is extra constitutional or non-constitutional. As I said, it does not find any mention in the Constitution. There is no law passed by the Parliament with regards to this. This is a body that has been formed by the Supreme Court itself in the 3 judges' cases. This is like a Supreme Court initiated to give itself all the powers. Second important concern with respect to collegium is that it gives the discretion to the judges to decide who shall be the next judge. Now understand this. The judges in the Supreme Court, most of them were earlier High Court judges. In effect, they know who is in the High Court. They might have direct connection to many of the judges who are in the High Court right now. Thus, there is a chance that when the collegium has to decide, there may be certain issues when the judges try to favor some other judges. Because there is no role of the government, there is no role of any external agency whatsoever, it gives discretionary powers to the judges to decide who shall be the next judge, which is again a cause of concern. No judge has, or any non-judge does not have any participation in the collegium. Nothing from the government side, nothing from the civil society. If you would have read Indian polity, you would have seen a few years back the government of India did try to replace the collegium system by introducing a new system. That new system was called NJAC, that is the National Judicial Appointment Commission. The idea was, rather than having the collegium take a call on all these matters, let's have a 6-member body. NJAC will have 3 members from the Supreme Court and 3 members from the government side, including the law minister also. These together should decide the next Supreme Court judge. But as expected, the Supreme Court struck this down, saying that no, this is against the basic structure of the Constitution, we will not allow this. The collegium, in the manner that it works today, is also considered as a very opaque kind of a body. Why? See, when the collegium has to decide who shall be the next Supreme Court judge, they actually have to see who fulfills the eligibility criteria. As I said, most of the Supreme Court judges are appointed from the first criteria, which is that the person should be High Court judge for 5 years. Now, if you look at high courts across the country, at any point of time, there are multiple judges who have completed their 5 years in the High Court. It doesn't mean that the Collegium will just pick the senior most judge from the High Courts and appoint him in the Supreme Court. That doesn't happen. They take into consideration a lot of other features as well. They discuss about how many cases have they heard, what are the kind of cases have they heard, but what are those discussions, what are the points taken into consideration, it is never made public. So public, common people like you, me, even the government, we never get to know what is the discussion within the Collegium system. Which judge is favoring who, what are the points that are being considered. It is an extremely opaque system. There are also instances where nepotism has actually kicked in. As I said earlier, most of the judges in the Supreme Court today were High Court judges at some point of time in their career. Meaning that they would know a lot of judges from the High Court. They would know that in the High Court, many of them would actually have their relatives, their brothers, their people who are actually friends. There is always a scope, and it has actually come out in the past in multiple media reports, there is always a scope of Collegium favoring certain judges because they don't have to justify their decision. As long as a judge has completed 5 years in the High Court, that is it. What are the kind of cases the person has heard, that doesn't really matter. That is why in many cases talent is also overlooked. Also, as we discussed earlier, Collegium has never chosen a person from the third category of eligibility criteria. What was the third category? The person should be a distinguished jurist. So no one from the third category of a distinguished jurist has ever been appointed in the Supreme Court as a judge. So a lot of talent is being overlooked. Now you might ask, who is a jurist? Now jurists are not judges, jurists are not advocates. Jurists can be those people who are experts in law. Let's assume that people who take up the BA, LLB, MA, LLB degree, it's not necessary that all of them have to become lawyers. Maybe after someone completed BA, LLB, MA, LLB degree, they went on to teach in law schools. They went on to become famous professors in law. Many of them might have done doctorate, might have pursued PhD, might have done research in the field of law, etc. So those can be considered as jurists. People who are experts in the field of law, they are not lawyers, they are not advocates, but experts in the field of law who are teaching or who are doing research. They can also come under this category, but they have not come so far. Now, specifically, if you look at the Office of the Chief Justice of India, there are a few things that have to be discussed here. A few things that have remained at the center of the controversy. First, the appointment procedure. As we discussed earlier, the Chief Justice of India is appointed by the President of India. The usual process is that the outgoing Chief Justice of India will nominate his successor, and the successor usually is a senior most judge of the Supreme Court. But as I said earlier, it is not something that has always been followed. There have been exceptions, and whenever it has happened, it has led to huge controversy, because this is taking away the right of the other judges who are next in line. There is also one more issue regarding the Office of the Chief Justice of India, that is Master of the Roster. If you go a few years back, India had a Chief Justice of India, Justice Deepak Mishra. When he was the Chief Justice of India, there was a case that came in the Supreme Court where he was indirectly related to the case. Not directly, his name was not mentioned, but he was indirectly related to the case. So basically, when he was in High Court, he was one of the people who had actually presided over that case. His name, his connection had come there, and then such case actually came in the Supreme Court also. Now, the interesting part was, when such a case came to the Supreme Court, it is common sense that if you are involved in a case, you cannot be the judge, right? This is the principle of natural justice. You cannot be the judge in your own case. However, Justice Deepak Mishra insisted that I will be the one who will decide who presides over this case. So much so that Justice Deepak Mishra in fact made a bench where he was one of the persons or the senior most judge in the bench, and some other judges, some junior judges were involved. This led to a lot of controversy. Basically, that same case was now being heard by different benches. One bench where Justice Deepak Mishra himself was involved, and other bench where some other senior judges were involved. It became a big point of discussion across the entire country. The question was very simple. Who decides which case will be heard by which judges? Or is it the Chief Justice of India who has a free hand of deciding which case will be heard by which judge, because that gives him a lot of powers? It was finally decided in the Supreme Court, and it has been reiterated multiple times since then, that Chief Justice of India is the master of the roster. What exactly do you mean by roster? Roster in simple terms means a schedule of cases. So for example, as you know, at any point of time, the Supreme Court presides over multiple cases. It's not that the Supreme Court will only hear one case at a time. So there are multiple courtrooms, and then different cases go on simultaneously. Every case is heard by a different bench. Which judge will hear which case? How many judges will there be in a bench? For example, if there is a specific case, should it be heard by a 2-judge bench, 3-judge bench, 5-judge bench, 7-judge bench, 9-judge bench, so on and so forth? How many judges will there be in the bench? That is decided by the Chief Justice of India. Who will be the judge in which bench? That is also to be decided by the Chief Justice of India. This is called the roster, and he is a master of the roster. Now, this gives immense powers to the Chief Justice of India, because the power to decide who shall be the judge presiding over a particular case can actually determine the outcome of the case. Because understand this, judges are also human beings. They also have certain way of thinking. So the Chief Justice of India knows how a certain judge thinks usually. While appointing that judge to a particular case, they may actually impact the outcome of the case. This is also something that has been discussed quite a lot. Now, those were the issues with respect to the office of the Chief Justice of India specifically. However, if you go ahead and keep an eye on the entire judicial system of the country, even there you will find a lot of issues that still exist. I'll just point out a few of them. First, the inefficiency of the Supreme Court or courts at large. I'll give you some examples. In the Supreme Court, there are a lot of cases which have been listed for many, many years, and the judges have just not taken up those cases. I'll give you an example. Let's take an example of the electoral bond case. Electoral bond as a scheme, when it came out, the opposition parties were not happy with it for a lot of reasons. Opposition parties say that only one particular party is getting most of the money, government has a lot of power, they can get to know who is buying these bonds, so on and so forth. So what happened was, in 2019, there were some political parties that went to the Supreme Court and said that we want you to actually look into this matter. In 2019, Supreme Court said that, see, elections are very near, Lok Sabha elections were coming in May 2019, so we will not hear the matter now, let the election go on. Okay, the election went on. After that, there were so many state elections, because every single year we have some state elections in India. So the matter just kept on getting delayed, 2019, 2020, 21. Finally, 2022, the matter has now come up again. But for such an important matter to be delayed from 2019 till now not being heard, it's not something that actually reflects well on the Supreme Court's image. Similarly, you can say the same thing about the matters or about the cases which were challenging the Citizenship Amendment Act. The Citizenship Amendment Act that led to a lot of protests, so many people went to the court against it, and the matter is still pending, it is just not being heard by the court. So there are a lot of extremely important cases which ideally should have been taken up by the court on a priority basis, but they have not taken it up. Now there can be various reasons for that. As we discussed, the Chief Justice of India is a master of the roster. So Chief Justice of India may decide which case to be heard, which case not to be heard. That also has led to a lot of controversy. The second issue is that overall in India, we just don't have enough judges. If you look at the population of India and then you look at the number of judges that we have, there is no match between the two. India lump sum has about 20 judges per million. However, in other nations, most of them usually have 50 to 70 judges per million people. Now, this leads to a lot of problems. First big problem, obviously, pendency. There are so many pending cases right now. It has reached 4 crore plus number. So this is huge number of cases which is just pending because we don't have enough judges. Similarly, because we don't have enough judges, a lot of them are overworked as well. On the other hand, we have so many vacancies. The Supreme Court is the only court where usually we don't have vacancies. But if you look at high courts, if you look at district courts, if you look at subordinate courts, all these courts have vacancies in very, very large numbers. Vacancy means that you will never have enough judges which can actually hear the case. Now, if you look at the Supreme Court itself, there is one more question that many people raise. Number of working days. If you go to the Supreme Court website, you will see that they have a calendar, the yearly calendar that they publish. Yearly calendar basically talks about what are the days in which Supreme Court will not function, like summer vacation, winter vacation, Diwali holidays, etc. Interestingly, if you look at that working calendar of the court, you will see that the Supreme Court usually, it can be plus minus 15, 20, usually they only work for 200 days in a year. 200 days in a year. Now, this means that there are a lot of holidays, not a lot of non-working days of the Supreme Court. At a time when we have so many pending cases, there are over 60,000 pending cases in the Supreme Court itself, does it make sense to have so many vacations or holidays? This is actually a concept that the British had introduced. When the British were in India, because they were not very comfortable with the Indian weather, especially in the summers, we used to have summer vacations where the judges could not really work properly. But now that we have every facility, we have air conditions, everything is provided, it doesn't make a lot of sense to have such long gaps. Yes, even during these days, we have something called a vacation bench. So what Supreme Court does is, when the judges are on leave, on holiday, usually there are a few judges, usually junior judges in the Supreme Court that still remain, so they basically take holidays later on. They are called a vacation bench. So if there is a very urgent case that has to be in the Supreme Court, the vacation judge or vacation bench usually hears that matter. But they don't hear very important matters. They don't hear constitutional matters. In fact, Justice U.U. Lalit, that is the present Chief Justice of India, has announced when he came to the Chief Justice of India's office, he did announce that even during vacations, I will ensure that there is at least a vacation bench every single day of the year. So these are the kind of reforms which are required. There is a delay in the recruitment, as I said. If you look at high courts, if you look at district courts, if you look at subordinate courts, there are huge number of vacancies. There is a very, very long delay in the recruitment. Central government says it is a state government's responsibility. We can't look into appointment of district judges. We can't look into appointment of subordinate judges. It is the state government that should look into that. State governments say we don't have enough funds, we don't have enough help. So it's basically a matter that is just about shifting blame from one side to the other. One thing else that is actually ignored a lot in the judiciary is the inadequate representation of women and minorities. As we discussed, India so far has never had even one female Chief Justice of India. If everything goes to plan, we might have one by 2027. But it's such a long gap. India will complete 80 years of independence when we have our first female Chief Justice of India. Now, it is not just about the judges. Recently, the Chief Justice of India made a statement. He said that if you look at courts across the country, you will see most of the courts don't even have female washrooms. How can you expect female lawyers, female judges, or other females who are working in the court? How can you expect them to feel safe at courts as a workplace when they don't even have proper female washrooms? So there is a lot of gap between ensuring that women actually have adequate representation and actually making it a reality. There is gap in infrastructure, there is gap in awareness, there is gap in facility. Our entire attitude towards them is not great. Now, it is not to say that male judges can't deliver good justice. But you also have to understand that when there are female related issues, for example, that come to the court, it is not unbelievable or it is not difficult to actually imagine that women judges will have a better understanding of those issues. So having their adequate representation will go a long way in ensuring gender justice and gender disparity. One other thing that all of you are well aware of is how many cases are pending in the courts in India. If you actually just go to Google and type National Judicial Data Grid, you will see that the number of cases pending in India are huge right now. Look at the district and taluka courts. The number of cases pending is 4,26 lakh. And this just keeps on increasing every single year. Similarly, look at the high courts. Even in the high courts, the number of cases that are pending are close to 60 lakh. The National Judicial Data Grid does not have a real-time dashboard for the Supreme Court. Please do remember this. They don't have a real-time data of Supreme Court. That is also a demand that has been made that the Supreme Court should also publish the real-time data. But it is very scary to just look at the numbers. Just imagine you having to go to Judiciary, you filing a case and knowing at the back of your mind there are over 4 crore cases that are pending right now. What are the chances that your case will be heard in the coming days? That is why there is an urgent need to look into this. Now, how can we do this? There are various ways. First, increase the number of judges. Even in Government of India's own economic survey report says that in the Supreme Court, if we have to resolve the pending case in the next 5 years, we should have at least 8 more judges. They said that about 40 judges should be appropriate. But we have about 34 judges in the Supreme Court. If you look at the number of judges in the High Court, I would just advise you, just do a Google search of number of judges in High Courts, the sanctioned strength as compared to the present number of judges. You will see such a huge gap. Many of the Supreme Courts have close to 50% seats that are vacant. The situation is even worse in the lower judge cases. Now, when you ask the government about these things, why is it that they are not appointing more judges? They give a lot of reasons. One big reason, especially for the Supreme Court, that is given from the side of the government is that if we increase the number of judges all of a sudden, if we appoint, let's say if we have 50 judges all of a sudden in the Supreme Court, then we don't think quality will be maintained. The government says that we have to be very careful about the quality, about the knowledge level of the judges who are being appointed in the Supreme Court. Only and only if they are deserving enough should they actually get a chance to be appointed at the Supreme Court and at the High Court level. But eventually there has to be a balance found between the two. There has to be a balance between how many judges are actually required so that we can resolve these cases, and on the other hand there has to be a balance between the quality. It is very easy to say that we should have good justice, even if it is delayed, doesn't matter, we should have good justice. But the reality is, if you delay providing justice so much, the value of justice actually gets watered down. There is no value left in justice if you actually delay it to such a long extent. And that is why we need to ensure that the vacancies is actually curtailed. We have to ensure that the recruitment process is speeded up. And we also have to ensure that the appointment of judges, especially at the lower level, subordinate court, district courts, etc., is also extremely efficient. There has been suggestion that we should have All India Judicial Service also. We should have recruitment of judges at district level, etc., from a body like UPSC, but that idea has not really come into reality. So if it remains to be seen, what are the new initiatives that the new Chief Justice of India does once he takes over the office in the coming days. This is what we had for you in today's explained session. I hope this was helpful. Please do let us know in the comment section if you would want us to bring you live sessions for explain on any specific topic. If you have not subscribed to our YouTube channel of BYJU'S IAS till now, please do hit the subscribe button. Do share this class with your friends also who are preparing for the UPSC examination. Thank you so much. We will see you now next Friday, 8 p.m. with the next explain. Thank you. Good night. Bye-bye. Jai Hind.